Short, Speedy Sermon Summaries. This sermon's title is The Great Misunderstanding, and it was presented by Pastor Creflo Dollar from the World Changers International Church. The main text, Romans 6:14. The main thought, we are free from living under the law, but we live under God's grace. He had several secondary verses. After telling everyone to disregard his previous sermons on tithe, Pastor Dollar said, nowhere in the New Testament does it recommend that Christians follow a legalistic tithe system. It never specified a percentage of income a Christian should set aside. It only says that gifts should be in keeping with your income. Then he asked the question, what about Abraham's tithing? He said Melchizedek showed up unannounced and won the battle for Abraham and then brought him gifts. Abraham was blessed first, and then he returned a tithe. Pastor Dollar said, our giving is a declaration of our dependence on God. He also stated that we can't assume that Abraham gave like this all the time. Then he dug into 1 Corinthians 16:2. He says that Paul tells Christians to put aside a portion of their money, but he didn't say what percentage. Each Christian should give as they are able. Sometimes that may be 10%, sometimes it may be more, sometimes it's less. He also mentioned when all the tithing in the Old Testament is added up, it ended up being closer to 23% anyway. So a 10% tithe isn't even completely accurate. Then he talked about 2 Corinthians 9:7. He said each person must decide in their own heart how much to give. Giving should be cheerfully, not reluctantly or due to pressure. Pastor went to Matthew 23:23. He said here Jesus is talking to Jewish people, saying that they should be tithing and keeping all the parts of the law if they're living under the law. He's challenging them to tithe with the proper attitude. Pastor mentioned that whenever Paul taught about giving, he never talked about tithe. He said Paul's giving teachings don't actually mention a 10% tithe. And then he gave a couple of examples. 1 Timothy 6:17 and 18, 2 Corinthians chapters 8 and 9, Galatians 6 and 6. Then he talked about the Jewish council of Christians that had to review and commune with God. They came back with the three things that Gentile converts needed to adhere to in alignment with the Jewish law. 1, don't eat foods offered to idols. 2, don't eat the blood or meat of strangled animals. And 3, refrain from sexual immorality. Tithing was never mentioned. This is found in Acts 15, verses 5 and 28. He then talks about Malachi 3:8, and he says that Jesus was the blessing that was poured out from the window of heaven. This is another example of how Jesus was the fulfillment of the law. Then he posed the question, how much should we tithe? What you give needs to come from God speaking to you, not from what you read he told someone else to give. Revelation comes from when you get a word from God, not a word of God, and you need to communicate with God for yourself. Pastor Dollar said our motive for giving shouldn't be to get more stuff from God. It should be an expression of dependence, love, and obedience to God's voice. He said that you can still give 10%, but it is not required. Click the link in the description to watch the entire sermon. Press the like button to see more short, speedy sermon summaries.